The last light of evening stretched across Red Hollow like a dying breath, brushing the cottonwoods beside the Marston cabin with streaks of gold that soon faded into blue. Ella Marston stood on her porch, her hands still dusted with grain from feeding the goats, listening to the world settle into dusk. The land around her had a way of speaking, soft, lonely, honest, whispering through the cottonwood leaves and rustling over the dirt road that wound toward town, but hardly ever saw a traveler. Most folks avoided this edge of the frontier. Too quiet, they said. Too empty. Too full of ghosts. Ella didn't mind the solitude. It had been her companion for 3 years, ever since the news of Caleb's death drifted home on a storm, first as a rumor, then as a certainty. Raiders had taken him, the story went, somewhere near the San Pedro crossing. His body was never found. That absence had become its own grave, a hollow place that echoed inside her each time the wind hit the cabin walls. She learned to live with it, not by forgetting, but by moving carefully, softly, as though disturbing the air too much might make the memory shatter. Her days followed a rhythm carved by necessity. Dawn meant carrying water from the creek and scattering feed for the goats. Midday meant mending fences or patching roof shingles with strips of tarred cloth. Sundays she rode into Red Hollow, sat in the back pew of the small church, bowed her head through hymns, and left before anyone could ask how she'd been holding up. Folks respected her space. They saw her as a woman stitched together with grief and grit, someone not to disturb unless there was a real need. But if anyone had watched her closely, truly watched, they might have noticed the things she never explained. Like how she walked her land long after midnight, lantern unlit, moving as if she knew every stone by heart. How she hammered her shutters shut each evening with quick, precise taps that echoed like code against the wooden frame. How she rolled out maps on her kitchen table, old ones, drawn by surveyors decades ago, and traced the edges of forgotten trails with her fingertips. Or how her tools, axes, knives, hammers, were always sharpened to a quiet gleam. She never spoke of these habits, and no one asked. A widow was entitled to her strange ways, they figured. Out here, grief made people do all kinds of things. Night wrapped itself around the ranch as Ella finished checking the latch on the chicken coop. She straightened, rubbing her palm over her apron as a faint tremor of unease crept up her spine. Something was different in the air, an unfamiliar tension, like a cord stretched too tight. The goats sensed it too. They huddled near the fence, ears twitching, eyes rolling at shadows only animals could see. Ella scanned the darkening ridge. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. But the silence felt thick, watchful. She tried to shake it off and stepped inside her cabin, closing the door with a soft thud. The room smelled of wood smoke and lavender, the vestiges of a life she still tried to keep gentle. On the far wall, Caleb's coat hung from a nail, faded, torn at the hem, untouched since the day she'd folded it and placed it there. Sometimes she spoke to it when the nights ran long. Not tonight. Tonight she felt the land listening. Outside, a single rider crested the far ridge, his silhouette blending with the dusk. He remained still for a long moment, studying the lights from Ella's cabin as if measuring its worth. The rider wasn't alone. Behind him, a loose line of figures emerged one by one, dark shapes atop restless horses, their outlines sharp against the dying sky. They carried rifles slung low and cartridge belts that glinted when the last shred of sunlight caught them. These were no ranch hands, no travelers seeking shelter. They were black vultures. A name whispered across the territories, spoken in saloons and around campfires with the same hush reserved for plagues and curses. They didn't stay in one place long. They didn't need to. They followed opportunity, weak towns, lonely wagons, abandoned ranches. People said their leader, Rave Delmer, had eyes like burnt coal and a soul to match. Folks in Arizona claimed he'd once shot a preacher for refusing to give up a silver cross. In New Mexico, rumors told of a barn torched with a family still inside. No one knew which stories were true, but one thing was certain: the gang rode like carrion birds circling for a kill. Tonight, their shadows stretched long across Ella Marston's land. Inside the cabin, unaware of the figures gathering on the ridge, Ella poured herself a cup of herb tea. She sat at the small kitchen table, inhaling the steam that coiled upward in thin spirals, trying to quiet the tightness in her chest. She had always trusted her instincts. They kept her alive through long nights and hard winters, but the unease gnawing at her tonight carried a different weight. Something was coming. Something that wanted more than what she kept in her cupboards or her barn. She set the cup down, untouched. A faint sound drifted through the window, just a soft crunch of gravel, almost swallowed by the night. Ella froze. Her breath stilled. The sound came again, closer this time, a subtle shift of hooves settling into the earth. Her hand drifted toward the drawer beside the table, the one that held a small carving knife she used for whittling. Not a weapon. Not something meant for defense. But it was sharp, and it was within reach. She rose slowly, crossing the room without stirring the floorboards. When she reached the window, she pressed her back to the wall and angled her head just enough to peer out a crack between the shutters. What she saw made her pulse drum once. Hard, steady, like a hammer strike into her ribs. Dark figures. Horses. 5, 6, no, more. They were coming down from the ridge, fanning out across her land like wolves testing the edges of a sleeping herd. They thought the cabin was abandoned, or easy prey. Ella stepped away from the window, her heartbeat settling into a cold, measured calm. Not panic, not fear. Something older, something buried. The past had been quiet for a long time, but it had never really left her. It stirred now, rising from a place she'd forced it to sleep after Caleb vanished. A part of her she had sworn she would never wake again. She moved through the cabin, blowing out the lamp, plunging the room into shadows. The darkness felt familiar, almost comforting. She stood silent, listening as the hoofbeats drifted closer, then halted near her barn. Muffled voices followed, rough, taunting tones carried by men who believed no one on this edge of the frontier could challenge them. They were wrong. Outside, the gang dismounted, their boots thudding into the dirt. Lantern lights swung from one of their hands, casting crooked beams across the ground. They whispered among themselves, deciding who would approach the cabin first. Ella didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't tremble. Through the window shutters, she could see their shadows stretching across her porch, tall, jagged, hungry. The kind of shadows that took without asking. The black vultures had come to Red Hollow, and as their silhouettes grew sharper, closing in around the widow's home, the land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something it hadn't felt in years. Something that lived in the quiet places of Ella Marston's past. Their boots hit the porch steps. Their hands reached for the door. And the storm she'd sensed all evening finally broke as their dark outlines filled the ridge behind them, tightening like a noose around the woman they believed was alone. They hit the door like a battering ram, splintering wood and iron hinges in a single violent crash. Ella didn't flinch. The force of the black vultures pouring into her cabin sent dust spinning through the lamplight and rattled the tin cups on her shelf, but she remained exactly where she stood, beside the hearth, hands loose at her sides, eyes steady as stone. The first outlaw through the door froze for half a heartbeat, surprised to see her upright rather than whimpering in a corner. Then he grinned, a crooked leer that showed teeth stained with tobacco and cruelty. Well, well, he drawled, kicking the broken door further open with his boot. Look what we got here. Little Widow still awake. Behind him, the rest pushed in, rough men with scarred hands, patchy beards, and eyes always searching for something to break. They spread across the room like a flood, overturning chairs, scattering her sewing box across the floor, slashing into sacks of grain so hard-earned and carefully stored. Ella tracked each movement without shifting her stance, her gaze following them the way a hawk watches mice in a field. One of them, a lanky fellow with a twitching jaw, strode to her kitchen shelves and swept everything onto the floor. Plates, jars, a small wooden carving Caleb had made her during their first winter together. It cracked in two against the boards. "Got any silver, darlin'?" he asked, flicking open a drawer and dumping its contents. "Money. Jewelry. Something worth our time." Ella said nothing. Her silence irritated him. He crossed the room in 3 angry strides and grabbed her by the arm, jerking her forward. "Speak up," he snarled. "Where's your stash?" Her eyes lifted to his, calm and unblinking. "I don't have anything you want." The gang burst into laughter at her answer. A heavy-set outlaw near the window slumped against the wall, roaring as though she'd told the funniest joke in the world. Another jabbed at a family photo on the mantel with the muzzle of his rifle. "No stash," he mocked. "Lady, everyone's got something. Even widows." Rafe Delmer, the gang's leader, appeared in the doorway then, silhouetted by the night behind him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a coat that flicked like raven wings when he moved, he stepped inside with the calm of a man who had broken into dozens of homes and expected each one to surrender before him. His eyes, hard, black, unreadable, took an Ella stance, the wreckage around her, the men tearing apart her things. "What's she saying?" he asked without looking away from her. "Claims she's got nothing," the lanky bandit answered. But she's lying. I can smell it. Rafe finally broke his stare, glancing at the floorboards. Rip up the planks. A lonely cabin never stays tidy by accident. Two outlaws immediately set to work prying the boards loose with hatchets. The sound of splitting wood thudded through the room, rattling the lantern on Ella's table. She watched them uncover nothing but dust and the cold earth below. One of the men kicked the empty space. Damn waste of time. Rafe walked closer to Ella, stopping only a foot away. She smelled the sharp tang of whiskey and gun oil on him. His voice was soft when he spoke, but not with kindness. You're awfully calm for someone losing everything. I've lost worse, she replied. The quietness of her tone unsettled the gang. Men who'd faced screaming, fighting victims didn't know what to do with someone who refused to tremble. Rafe studied her face for a long moment, trying to decide whether she was foolish or fearless. Before he could speak again, another outlaw shoved aside a wardrobe and pried open a crate beneath it. Just clothes and old blankets, he shouted. Nothing worth stealing. Burn it all, Rafe ordered, turning away from her. If she's hiding something, she'll talk once she sees it go up in flames. Ella didn't move even as her belongings, the quilt sheet stitched by candlelight, the dried herb she'd grown, Caleb's old boots, were dragged outside and piled like kindling. One outlaw lit a match and tossed it into the heap. Flames curled upward, licking the night sky with greedy fingers. Still calm. Rafe taunted, watching her from the doorway. Her voice carried no tremor. Fire doesn't frighten me. The lanky bandit grabbed her by the shoulders this time and shoved her outside, forcing her to stand before the blaze. Sparks drifted past her face. Smoke stung her eyes, but she didn't lift a hand to wipe the tears forming. She inhaled the scent of burning wood, wool, and memory, each one marking the life she had built with her own hands. A life now turning to ash. The outlaws circled her like wolves around a lone doe. You should cry, one said. Widows always cry. Ella stared into the fire, saying nothing. Another outlaw stepped closer and tapped the barrel of his revolver under her chin. Maybe she's too stubborn to break. Maybe she's too stupid, someone else muttered. But Rafe heard something else in her silence. He stepped closer, folding his arms. You hiding gold? He asked. Family inheritance. Something worth my men's time. No. Then why the steady eyes? He leaned in, lowering his voice. Fear always shows itself. Always. So where's yours? Ella finally looked at him, not with defiance or hatred, but with a chilling clarity that made Rafe's fingers tighten around the grip of his gun. It was the look of someone who had faced fear long ago and made peace with it. I buried it, she said softly. Years ago. The gang grew restless at the strange answer. Rafe scoffed and turned away. Mount up, he commanded. Place is worthless. The men began walking toward their horses, kicking dirt at the smoldering fire as they passed. One gave Ella a rough shove that sent her stumbling into the dirt. Another threw her broken door on top of the burning pile, laughing as sparks scattered. When the last outlaw climbed into his saddle, Rafe lingered, staring down at her. You're lucky we're feeling generous tonight, he said. Next time we see you, widow, pray you have something worth taking. They rode off toward Red Hollow, their shadows stretching across the land like a black tide receding. Ella stayed where she was until the sound of hooves faded into the wind. Only then did she lift herself slowly from the ground. The night felt colder without the fire's heat, cold enough to reach her bones. But something within her had stopped trembling. Something quiet and sharp had awakened, steering beneath the grief that had numbed her for years. She walked toward the smoking ruins of her belongings and knelt in the ashes. Her fingers sifted through the charred remnants, touching the pieces of a life that had once felt safe, small, and contained. A scorched scrap of her wedding quilt clung to her palm. She let it flutter away. In the silence, a memory rose, Caleb's voice, low and steady, as he guided her hands around a rifle for the first time. In case trouble ever comes, Ella, you meet it before it meets you. Another flash, moonlit nights when they'd track coyotes through the hills, Caleb teaching her how to read broken brush, how to move without leaving sound behind, how to see mistakes before they were made. He'd always said she had a gift. She'd always laughed it off, insisting she only wanted peace. Peace had burned with her cabin door. Ella rose and walked back inside the ruined home. Smoke clung to the rafters, drifting like transparent ghosts. A floorboard lay cracked near her feet, one of the planks the outlaws had torn up in their frenzy. Beneath it, hidden from the careless eyes of men who didn't know how to look properly, was a small iron ring. She knelt, slipped her fingers beneath it, and pulled. The trapdoor lifted with a soft groan of old hinges. Cool air rose from the darkness below. A faint scent of cedar drifted upward. Ella reached into the hidden space and drew out a long, oil-wrapped bundle tied with 2 leather straps. She placed it gently on the floor and unfastened the bindings. The night had deepened into a cold, star-bladed darkness by the time Ella finished packing the last of her ammunition. Her cabin still smoldered behind her, sending thin ribbons of smoke curling into the sky like morning veils. But Ella didn't look back. She tightened the saddle cinch on her mare, an aging but loyal bay named Rose, and slid the custom rifle into its scabbard with slow, deliberate care. Her movements carried the ease of memory, the muscle-born familiarity of someone who had lived more years with a gun than without one. For years she had refused to touch these weapons, believing that violence had died with the woman she once was. But when she reached for the Colt, her fingers fit around the grip as naturally as a heartbeat returning after a long sleep. It was like touching a former self, one she had buried under quilts and church hymns and the quiet rhythm of ranch life. Now that self stirred again. The Silver Raven, she murmured under her breath, tasting the old name like a forgotten language. It had haunted the territories once, spoken by travelers, whispered by raiders with a shiver. A marksman and scout who could vanish into the shadow of a canyon wall, whose shots were said to thread through wind like silk. A woman who fought side by side with militias and desperate townsfolk when raiders swept the frontier. The Silver Raven had turned battles that should have been massacres into narrow victories. And then she vanished. The world believed she had died when the San Galloway crossing ran red with blood. 15 raiders fell that night, but the price was steep. Ella had lost 3 friends, a piece of herself, and the will to keep living as a weapon. Caleb found her afterward, broken and bleeding, and carried her out of that hell. She vowed to him that she would leave that life behind forever. But vows made in peace had no power over men like the black vultures. Ella mounted Rose, the saddle creaking beneath her. "Easy, girl," she whispered, feeling the horse tense at the smell of smoke and the metallic tang of Ella's focus. "We'll ride quiet." She nudged the mare forward, slipping into the night like a shadow retreating from firelight. The sky was moonless, but Ella didn't need brightness. Her eyes had been trained long ago to read the land by starlight, by instinct, by the slightest shift in the world's pulse. She found the first sign of the gang 30 yards from her cabin. Hoofprints pressed deep into the soft dirt, leading toward Red Hollow. Recent, she could tell by the sharp edges of the impressions, unblurred by wind. Another few yards on, she found a cigar stump still smoldering. She crouched beside it, touching the ash with the tip of her finger. The heat said they were no more than an hour ahead. "That's enough," she breathed. "More than enough." Rose carried her swiftly down the faint trail that wound between low shrubs and thin, spiny mesquite trees. The night ahead was restless with distant coyote cries and the steady crunch of hooves on dry earth. Tracks grew clearer as she followed them, trampled grass, broken branches, scuff marks on stones where riders had brushed past at speed. She leaned low, examining a chipped rock edge. Someone's spur had struck it, left a new scratch. She stood slowly, her breath misting faintly in the cooling air. Every sign tightened her resolve. Images of Caleb flickered through her mind. His laughter, the way he tied his bandana when the wind picked up, how he taught her to shoot not from anger, but from purpose. She had promised him a life without violence. But Caleb had also believed in justice. And when he died, the part of her that believed the world could be fair died with him. Tonight, justice wasn't a choice. It was the only thing left standing. She rode for an hour, then another, guided by faint dust clouds and the echoes of rowdy voices carried across the plains. As she approached Red Hollow's outskirts, the land opened into a broad stretch of flat ground. In the distance, the town lay mostly dark, windows shuttered, lamplight extinguished. Folks had learned never to linger outside after sundown. Too many stories. Too many guns. But one place still flickered, the long-abandoned Miller barn, leaning crooked at the far end of the field. A lantern glowed from inside, flickering like a dying heartbeat. Ella could hear rough laughter drifting from its open doors, unmistakably the vultures. She dismounted beneath the cover of a mesquite tree, patting Rose's neck to keep her calm. "Stay," she whispered. The mare lowered her head obediently. The ground here was dusty, soft, perfect for muffling footsteps. Ella moved with the silence of something half-wild, weaving between shadows. Behind the barn, the gang's horses were tied to a hitching post, snorting, pawing nervously at the dirt as if sensing danger. Ella reached them without a sound. She worked quickly, slicing each rein with a single downward stroke of her hunting knife. The horses lifted their heads but didn't cry out. Her hands were steady, her movements calm enough to keep them from spooking. When the last rein snapped, she gave a low, soft whistle. The horses scattered like a burst of wind, disappearing into the dark with their hooves pounding against the earth. Inside the barn, the gang erupted in confused shouts as they heard their mounts thunder away. "What the hell was that?" someone barked. "Something spooked him. Get a lantern. Check outside." But Ella wasn't done. Near the barn doors lay an old iron chain coiled in dust. She grabbed it silently, then looped it around the handles of the large double doors, sliding the bolt through the links. With a swift tug, she secured the chain tight. Anyone inside would have to break the hinges to escape. The laughter inside shifted into cursing. "Go check it, idiot." "I'm trying. Damn door's stuck." Ella stepped back, her breathing slow and controlled as she melted into the deep shadow beneath the barn's overhang. She could see through a knothole in the wood, the men stumbling around inside, their faces twisted with irritation, unaware that the night had turned against them. Then one figure stumbled toward the side door, the only one without the chain. He shoved it open with a grunt, grumbling about taking a leak, and stepped into the cool air. Ella watched him walk a few steps into the field, unbuttoning his belt, muttering curses under his breath about their stupid horses. He stood with his back to her, facing the open plains. Then something, instinct, or the prickling sensation of eyes, made him slow. He turned his head slightly, squinting at the dim lantern glow spilling from the barn behind him. A shape stood just beyond the circle of light. Tall, motionless, wrapped in the hush of night. The outline was unmistakably human, but wrong somehow. Too still, too certain, like a carving made from shadow. The outlaw blinked, leaning forward as dread crept up his spine. "Who's there?" he called, voice cracking. The figure stepped once into the edge of the light, and the glint of a polished colt caught the lantern's glow. Ella Marston, the Silver Raven, stood waiting, her silhouette unreadable, her presence colder than the desert wind. And when the outlaw's breath caught in his throat, she knew he finally understood. They hadn't come after Widow. They'd awakened a legend. The outlaw froze mid-breath, the cold night air sticking in his throat as he stared at the silhouette before him. Ella didn't move, didn't blink. She stood like the still heart of a storm, every line of her body calm and deliberate. The outlaw fumbled backward, tripping over his own feet, scrambling to find his gun. He didn't get the chance. Her shot cracked the silence, clean, controlled, grazing his hand so sharply his revolver spun into the dirt. He screamed, clutching the wound. Ella stepped forward, her voice low and level. "You don't have to die tonight. Leave now. Walk until dawn. Never return." His eyes darted between her and the barn, panic swelling like an incoming tide. "Rafe will kill me if I run," he stammered. "Rafe won't see another sunrise," she replied. Something in her tone, soft as breath yet unshakable as stone, made him drop his hat and run into the darkness, stumbling over the fields until he vanished beyond the mesquite trees. Ella exhaled slowly, letting the tremor of adrenaline pass through her. Then she slid back into the shadows, becoming part of the night once more. Inside the barn, the outlaws were growing restless, pounding on the doors, cursing her name though they didn't yet know it was hers they should fear. She waited until one found the loose side door and kicked it open, stumbling into the night with a lantern raised high. "Where's Pete?" he barked. "He was out here, Pete." Ella watched him turn in circles, the jitter in his hands betraying a streak of fear. She stepped behind him so quietly the dust barely stirred. When he finally noticed the shift of air, he swung around too fast, lantern shaking wildly. "What? Who?" "Drop the gun," she murmured. He lifted it instead. Her elbow pressed into his wrist before he could aim, the gun clattering into the dirt as she twisted him to his knees. He cried out, more from shock than pain. "You don't want this," she said. "Walk away." He spat at her boots. "You think you scare me? We burned your life to ashes." "That wasn't my life." She guided him backward, forcing him to the ground but sparing him again. "Go. Don't look back." This one crawled away before he ran, limping wildly toward the open plains. Two gone. The rest would not be as wise. The barn doors crashed open at last as Rafe Delmer kicked the hinges until they splintered, his men pouring out behind him with guns drawn. Ella retreated into darkness, guiding them where she wanted, into the open field where moonlight painted long, trembling shadows across the ground. Van out. Rafe snarled. Find her. He had no idea she'd already found them. An outlaw broke from the pack, moving near the haystacks. Ella's shadow unfolded behind him like a second night. She slammed the stock of her rifle into the back of his knees, sending him crashing down. His gun fired into the dirt as he hit the ground. You're fast, he gasped. You're loud, she whispered, and kicked his revolver away. Leave. He didn't take the offer. He reached for a hidden knife instead. Her second shot hit the blade out of his hand, sending it spinning across the field in a flash of steel. This time he crawled away without a word. 3 gone. The others began to feel it, the pressure, the unseen presence, the way the dark seemed to move around them. Fear seeped through their ranks like cold water through cracks in a hull. One man started calling for Rafe in a trembling voice. Another fired blindly into the night. Ella didn't rush. Every slow, measured step she took was designed to unravel them. Finally, only 2 remained, one older outlaw with trembling hands, and Rafe Delmer himself. The older one tried to stand his ground but couldn't stop shaking. It ain't natural, he whispered, eyes darting everywhere and nowhere. Ain't no widow does this. Ella stepped forward just enough that he saw the glint of her Colt. Go home, she said. If you have one. He hesitated only a second before he ran, fear beating louder than any loyalty. That left Rafe. Ella walked into the open then, her coat catching the faint lantern glow still flickering from the barn. She didn't raise her gun yet. She wanted him to see her, to recognize her, to understand the truth before his end. Rafe's grin slid slowly across his face, amused, cruel, confident. Well, he drawled. The widow wants to play hero. I gave your men a chance, she said. They took it. I ain't them. He lifted his revolver lazily. You're a scared little woman who forgot her place. You think scared looks like this? She asked softly. A gust of wind fanned the embers inside the barn, causing flames to flicker along the edges of dry hay. Smoke rose, swirling like spirits awakened. The entire structure crackled ominously. Rafe glanced at it with mild interest. Shame if this old barn burns. But then, seems you and fire go way back, don't it? Husband died in flames, or was it the lie you tell yourself at night? Ella's voice was barely above a whisper. Don't speak his name. Rafe chuckled. He teach you to shoot. He teach you to hunt. Bet he did. Bet you were useless before him. Ella stepped closer. No, she said quietly. I taught him. For the first time, Rafe's smirk faltered. She let the truth settle between them like a drawn blade. I was the Silver Raven, she said. Long before you crawled into this world with a gun and a sneer. Rafe's eyes widened, the recognition sharp, undeniable. That's a ghost story, he spat. That's what you made of me, she replied. He jerked his gun up, desperate now. But she was already moving. Her draw was faster than instinct, faster than thought, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. The Colt cleared leather before Rafe even fully lifted his arm. The muzzle flash lit the field in a single brilliant flare. His gun clattered to the dirt. His hand, bleeding, dropped uselessly to his side. He staggered backward as the barn behind him finally burst into flame, lighting the entire hollow in a wash of crimson. The fire silhouetted him, wide-eyed, shaken, suddenly small in the face of something bigger than fear. You ain't real, he gasped. I'm what you made me, she said. She crossed the remaining distance, pulled Caleb's old martial badge from her coat, and held it up. The metal caught the firelight, gleaming like a star forged from justice itself. For Caleb, she whispered. Her final shot echoed across the hollow, rolling through the canyon like thunder. Rafe collapsed, the fire painting his fallen form in shades of red and gold. Silence settled slowly, like dust after a stampede. Ella stood there for a long moment, chest rising and falling as the heat of the burning barn washed over her face. Then she holstered her Colt, tucked the badge back against her heart, and turned away. By sunrise, the fire would be nothing but blackened beams. By noon, the wind would scatter the ashes of the black vultures across the plains. And by nightfall, the whispering would begin. They would say a widow walked into Red Hollow alone, her coat torn by gunfire, her eyes fierce and unbroken. They would talk of the outlaw gang that vanished without a trace. They would speak of a legend reborn, of a shadow in the shape of a woman, riding away from blood and flame. Ella Marston swung into her saddle as dawn broke pale and gold across the horizon. She didn't look back. Legends never needed to. She rode toward the rising sun, leaving behind a tale the West would repeat for generations, the story of the quiet widow who had once been the most feared legend alive.